New Mexico is a land of stories, myths, and legends. The unexplained and the unexplored. I'm Chad Brummett, and we are exploring the unique and unusual world of New Mexico Strange.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of New Mexico Strange. I'm Chad Brummett, and joining us again today, my good friend Ben Radford. And, Ben, today's topic is, it's one of those that it's like, if you look at just the sort of the storytelling element of it, getting the goosebumps in the middle of the night, they're fantastic, but it can also have real world implications. And we're talking specifically about urban legends.
Right.
I was a big fan of the movie, even though everyone may say, oh, it's a terrible movie. The sequel's probably not so great, but the original one with Jared Leto, I thought was fantastic. Loved it because it brought in all of these urban legends that we're familiar with. You know, the boyfriend on top of the car, or the Pop Rocks and soda. There's also When a Stranger Calls, the killer being inside the house. Right. But there was one in particular, and that is the urban legend of organ harvesting. Now, when I first heard about this, it was in the mid-'90s, got an email, and emails were still relatively new. The idea of, false information being spread on the internet, still decades away. Right. Not even there.
That wouldn't happen.
Right. That's not going to happen. This is from the internet. It must be right. But it basically saying, beware of meeting someone in like a hotel lobby or something, going, back to a hotel room, getting drinks. Someone is knocked unconscious. Their drink is drugged. They wake up in a bathtub full of ice and, a slit down their back and a note saying your organ, your kidneys have been harvested. Call the paramedics ASAP. That terrified me in the 90s because I thought it was, this is absolutely real. Then you learn, maybe it's not. It's just an urban legend. But that idea of organ harvesting actually found its way into very real-world reactions in Central America involving a New Mexican.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about this story of Melissa Larson.
Sure. Well, let me just sort of set the stage by explaining just a bit of background on what urban legends are.
Okay.
So the phrase urban legend it gets thrown around by anybody who thinks it's just any bit of misinformation or inaccurate information, whatever else. To a folklorist, an urban legend is a very specific type of legend, and it has a couple of characteristics. One of them is that it's told as true. So urban legends are always like, no, this seriously, this happened. It didn't necessarily happen to me, but it happened to a guy, or my sister's boyfriend.
Did you hear about that story in Lincoln, Nebraska?
Right,
and,
exactly. So it's what we call FOF tales, FOF, friend of a friend stories.
Okay.
So they're told as true. They're not always believed as true, but they're told as true, and sometimes they are believed. And we'll get into some of the consequences of that in a second. And also, they tend to be localized. In other words, there will be urban legends that they're universal. As a folklorist, you see examples collected from Germany, from France, from Brazil, from the Netherlands, wherever else, and they have certain commonalities. But in each location, they're told as if it happened right here. So, for example, there's the hook-handed killer. There's the slasher underneath the car at a mall. There's lots of urban legends about malls, for example. So here in Albuquerque, I live over on the west side, so I would hear that legend about Cottonwood Mall specifically, not Coronado Mall. Not any other mall, or Montgomery Mall, if it's still there, but very localized. And this is why, for example, ghost stories. You'll hear the same ghost story that is specifically about your local place. It's the creepy house down the road, or Dead Man's Curve in Corrales, or whatever else. And that does a couple things. One is that it makes them much more believable. Because this is not a generic mall. Right. This happened. No, dude, this happened like right there. This happened a mile from your house. So that gives them more urgency, right? Because you're like, oh, hold on, this could happen to me.
Right.
And another aspect of urban legends is that they are plausible. As I mentioned, they're told as true. And in order to do that, you have to make it something that is believable, right? So there aren't really urban legends about space aliens or fantastical, Middle Earth stuff. Urban legends are about things that could happen to us in any given day. There are things at work. There are things, jealous lovers. There are any number of things. So it's important to sort of get that perspective and understand what an urban legend is just from that perspective.
Sure.
So the case of the organ theft legends is of particular interest to me. I've researched it for many, many years. And there's basically two different versions of it. And I'll sort of briefly go over this. So you mentioned one of them, which is the most common one. The businessman on a holiday, that is and was a very common one. The other version of the organ theft story is about children.
Okay.
And that one is a bit more murky and sort of potentially dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so that version of the urban legend basically says that it's a conspiracy, basically. And the idea is that there are people, rich, powerful people around the world, but usually Americans or Westerners, that are seeking organs from children. And sometimes adults, but typically children. In the case of course, the adult version, which you mentioned, there's this sort of sense of, well, he deserved it, right? You shouldn't be, don't be flirting with hot girls, in the hotel, bar because, you got a wife and kids at home and, what's wrong with you? You're a pervert. You deserve to have your organ.
Right. It always comes off as like a cautionary tale.
Right. Which I think is kind of harsh. I'll be honest with you. I don't think I should have to
lose a kidney over it. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So in that version, it's sort of like, you play with fire, you take your chances, including maybe losing your kidney. In the child version of it, it's much more dangerous because this is a thing where the child obviously didn't ask for it. There's no fault of their own. They are just playing. They're in the park. They're at school. They're walking down the road, and the story goes that people, again, usually Americans, Brits, and maybe French, the Canadians, are paying either they're paying locals to do it, or they're involved themselves, and they're basically snatching children off the street and abducting them and killing them typically for their organs. And there's lots of red flags to this. For example, one thing is that that's not how organ donations work. If you research organ donations, you literally can't just grab a stranger off the street. That's not how that works. You need a histocompatibility test, right? Blood type test, right? So you'd need to know that the person you're abducting has a particular blood type, because otherwise, if you're type AB and someone else is B, the organ will be rejected regardless of what else is going on. So there's lots of logistical red flags that tell you this isn't happening, and it literally can't happen. It's not just logistically, that's not how medicine works. But nevertheless, these rumors spread, especially in recent years with social media. So over the past, say, 10, 20 years, as folklorists, we've seen more and more people sharing rumors on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and elsewhere, warning people about people who are trying to abduct children and take their organs. And as you can imagine, people share this because they're like, this is important.
Sure.
Like,
if they think it's real, they want to get the word out and protect others.
Exactly. So you can see why the average person, they may or may not believe it, but they figure better safe than sorry, right? Mm-hmm. I'm doing the right thing, right? This warning came across Nextdoor. This warning came across Instagram or TikTok, and I want to protect my fellow Americans, my fellow good, honest, hardworking people. You should be warned about this. Anyway, I've researched this for many, many years. There are many cases I could talk about, but there's a couple. There's one particular one that has a New Mexico connection. And this happened in March of 1994. And it was a Taos woman named Melissa Larson. And she was traveling by herself in Guatemala, rural Guatemala. And what happened to her was really horrific. So basically, she was just minding her own business. She was in this small town in rural Guatemala. And rumors began circulating that clearly an American woman, and people said, what is she doing here? Well, lots of foreigner backpackers were out, but for whatever reason, the locals came to believe that she was there to abduct children, specifically to kill them and to take their organs. And she didn't know this because she's just enjoying the plaza and taking in the sights and the trying the food and all the things that a traveler does. And a mob gathered and attacked her, and they started attacking and beating her. Again, she didn't know why. She was just minding her own business in a plaza. She may have taken a couple of photos, as any tourist does, right? She wasn't doing anything lecherous or creepy towards children. She was just taking photos of stuff that happened around, and rumors spread, as rumors do. And they said, why is she here? She's here to abduct children. And they attacked her, and she was actually she's put in jail for her own safety. So she managed to escape the crowd, and she was put in jail just so they couldn't attack her, and they would have killed her. And it happened, and again, this was in 1994, and a few weeks later, another woman, a woman from Alaska, June Weinstock, a very similar thing happened to her.
Really?
Again, just single American white woman, just traveling, not hurting anybody, just minding their own business, and the rumor spread, and she was beaten actually into a coma.
My gosh.
And hospitalized. It just strikes me where, it's very easy to sort of think about these rumors and stories and legends as being sort of harmless or cute or funny. You share them with friends. And I get that. That's why people love stories. We're humans are storytelling animals. We love stories with a twist, a joke, whatever else. But I think people sometimes forget that these things can have real consequences.
Yeah, and you do somewhat see that, especially when you're talking about misinformation or urban legends, because if you don't know, if you're and again, thinking about the timing of when this happened is really what struck me. So this, occurring in 1994,
right?
And trying to remember when I started seeing those emails about this, and I think that it was like late 90s, early 2000s, or that you started hearing this urban legend about the organ harvesting. That if you don't know that it's an urban legend, and you see, if you sort of cultivate this idea of fear of an outsider, you marry those two things, and if instinct takes over versus reason, it can have really bad consequences. Just as you said with June Weinstock and Melissa Larson, them becoming victims of something that they had no idea what they were, they didn't even know that they were targeted about this, and something as just a horrible idea of children being abducted and murdered and their organs being harvested. In your opinion, because, thinking of various other urban legends, I can't think of another urban legend that can potentially have this. I mean, this seems like the one urban legend where it's like, this is really crossing over into a line of reality, because I don't remember, someone's life potentially being, in danger for the babysitter, the call upstairs. Now, there have been instances that, potentially were inspired by it. But in terms of someone, I don't remember someone attacking like a mailman because they thought that they were a killer calling inside the house. Whereas this has real world consequences.
No, you're absolutely right. And, and part of it is reinforced by pop culture, right? So we have, there was a Law and Order episode that dealt with organ theft. There was a famous and pretty good film called Central Station, which was a Brazilian film.
Okay.
And in that film, there's a kid that escapes from organ thieves. You can imagine, for Hollywood loves this, right?
Yeah.
How can low budget horror film? We both love horror films. It's ready made.
Absolutely.
Low budget. You shoot it in Mexico. You shoot it in Guatemala. You shoot it in Costa Rica. You make 10 times your amount on the budget. But what happens is that people, they see these and they know it's not a documentary. They know that Teresa it's a horror film. It's got actors, this and that. But they say, well, that's a horror film, but this actually happens.
Right.
So they don't make that distinction. It's like, as a folklorist, I'm like, well, that's a horror film, and I watched it, and it was good, but that doesn't really happen. But for a lot of people, they're like, well, they make films about wars, about the Iraq War. That actually happened. So, or exorcisms. Haunted houses, Amityville. So the point is that it's easy for people to sort of blur the lines between fact and fiction, especially if you assume that's what's going on.
And it too, and this just kind of tapping in, as you said, you and I both fans of horror movies. One of my all-time favorites, Tobe Hooper's 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It really is a masterpiece. Classic. It really sets what we think of in a lot of modern cinema for horror. You can kind of look back to that. But of course, it starts off with this idea inspired by true events, which...
Well, John Larroquette's voiceover tells us that, kind of.
Exactly. But,
Right.
if you think back to what the inspired by true events, it really was...
It's the Encane murders, which is nothing like that. Yeah.
Exactly. It was a completely different thing. It wasn't a set of, Texas cannibals living outside of Austin, picking off these students. It was this Wisconsin guy in the 1950s that... also inspired Psycho, also had a hand in inspiring Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
But when you get that idea that it's inspired by true events, people can take it and they take that information and potentially run with it, but they run in the wrong direction.
Right.
They run in a direction that's not necessarily safe or, is responsible. And to that end, too, is we had started talking at the beginning, the advent and the growth of social media is making storytelling like this and making misinformation and disinformation all the more easier to share.
Right.
So in your experience, Ben, if someone if they come across a story like this, they, and I'm trying to think of like recent urban legends that may have sort of like a birth in, more recent times versus, the babysitter,
right.
All the old ones, the gang initiation, flipping your lights on, those are all kind of dated, but as we continue on and as society continues on, I can only imagine there will be more urban legends that pop up that we have not heard of yet. Do you have any advice for us media consumers out there as a folklorist, as someone that has looked at this, to say, before you buy that thing that you read on Facebook, before you buy this, think about that. Is there anything that you would advise us to kind of keep in our back pocket?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is to recognize who is the villain in these stories. Just to go back for a second to Texas Chainsaw, right? This is a group of outsiders, right? There's guys going through Texas, and they're suddenly where they shouldn't be.
Right.
There's always this motif of stay where you are. Watch out for scary people. Deliverance. We could go on.
Wrong turn.
We could do this for a couple hours.
This goes on and on and on.
Get a pizza and some beers. Let's do this. Exactly. Right. But I mean, again, in all these, again, you see this sort of the boogeyman effect. You have the outsiders. There's we're cool. What's with those other people? What's with those scary? And for example, the snuff film urban legend, right? One of them was, it was shot in South America where life is cheap. Well, here's the thing. I've been backpacking throughout Latin America. They love their children just as much as we do.
Yeah.
So this notion that like south of the border, there's all these disease-ridden immigrants that are trying to eat pets and attack people. Like, no, so that would be part of my thing is to get people to think about who is the villain in the story. And there's nothing wrong with having a villain in a story. That's what storytelling is.
Right.
There's a protagonist and an antagonist. You and I both, so there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem comes in when you make when you make the villain the scary outsider, the dirty people,
right.
The other. So part of it is recognizing that, and also, and again, sort of trying to think, well, what is plausible here, right? So you don't need to be a medical ethicist or a doctor to know that this doesn't make sense. You can't just, first of all, who would kill a child for their organs? Like, no reputable doctor would even do this. It just, none of this makes sense. There is organ selling. So this is one of the things where people sometimes donate their organs. This is true. In some cases, organs are sold. That has happened in India, Pakistan, elsewhere. There are occasional reports of Chinese prisoners having their organs harvested.
Wow.
Which is unethical, don't get me wrong, but that's not the same story.
Right.
So what happens is people they'll see these tidbits in the news and say, oh, well, that connects to that. No, it doesn't. They're not the same thing, but to them, it's all lumped together.
Yeah.
So that would be part of my advice would be to take a second, to take a step back and say, okay, well, does this make sense? And who's the villain here? And also just recognize that that, as I said before, these rumors can have consequences. This is not a joke. We only talked about two people. We talked about Weinstock and Larson. I can think of dozens more people who have been. There was a group of Japanese tourists that were attacked, and one of them was burned alive.
Oh my gosh!
This is still going on. This is not something that happened 50 years ago in Guatemala. These sorts of rumors. I follow these things. I write about them. These accusations of organ theft and witchcraft and things like that. This is happening today in Brazil, in India, in sub-Saharan Africa. So again, I know it can be sort of abstracted, blah blah blah. It's like, oh, it's all like, no. It's cute when you share it,
right? But
particularly on social media, there's been viral stories about abductions, not about organ theft specifically, but the abductions about people going and trying to abduct kids. There was the Wayfair conspiracy theory.
Well, what happened too at Comet Pizza in D.C. and this, what I think had become known in pop culture as Pizzagate. This guy believing that there was a basement at this Comet Pizza in D.C. where children were being kept.
Exactly.
The restaurant doesn't even have a basement.
Yeah, there's no basement.
He shows up with a weapon, is arrested, but then again, there again is this idea of something carrying you. You don't have any. I mean, do you have a basement? It doesn't even add up. There's not a way for it to add up, but it's just reacting without thinking,
right?
And just kind of firing off at the hip without really taking that pause of, let me just see if they have a basement first.
Maybe if
before
that's where
I
all
cross
the children,
state lines. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other part I want to point out to you, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's an important point, is that the guy that did that, the guy that burst into the pizza place with a gun, he thought he was doing good. This gets lost on people. He thought he was rescuing children.
He was.
They think they're doing good, and in many cases, they're doing more harm than good. In fact, they can harm real people. So. I would just ask people, take a step back, just because even if you think it might be true, if you have any doubt, think about what would be like if you were the subject of that.
Yeah.
Right. I know you don't care. You don't care if it's somebody else because it's the Mexicans, it's the immigrants, it's the touristas, whatever else. But think about how easy it would be for someone to spread a rumor about you, and how would you feel if suddenly there's a mob gathered around your house or your apartment, and they think you did something wrong,
right?
Because that's what some random person on Instagram said, and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. They don't want to hear it because they're so convinced. So
right. Yeah, it can go both ways, unfortunately. You can believe it or you can become the subject of it. Right. Neither of them are good. Ben, if people want more information on all the work that you do, because, again, you have a podcast, Squaring the Strange. You are contributing. Are you still the managing editor of Skeptical Inquirer? I mean, you wear like 5,000 hats. I don't even know which one to start with.
I was bumped up to deputy editor.
Okay.
I think I got an extra couple days vacation. So whatever. I'm the second banana, which
there
is
you go. But this kind of work, this kind of research is in your wheelhouse. So if we want to follow what you're doing, where can we find you online, on socials, get your books? Because you have a bevy of books with a variety of different topics.
Yeah. I've written, I think, 13 books, 14 if you include my last.
You need to get it to the 14 because you don't want to sit on that 13
too
long.
Unlucky.
Yeah, exactly.
The sooner the better. No. You can find, as you mentioned, I have a podcast, Squaring the Strange. My books are available. Try your independent bookstore first. If you can't get it, you can sometimes track me down. I do appearances now and then. I'll be happy to autograph your book. On Amazon. I'm on Facebook because, I'm over 40, but I'm around and about.
There you go. Well, Ben, thank you for all this information. Always appreciate these conversations, and we'll have you back. There's plenty more of strange stuff here in New Mexico to talk about.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And we appreciate you for joining us on this episode. Again, if you want other episodes, more information, and other original programming from KRQE, just head over to krqe.com. We'll have all that there. Thank you for joining us on this episode of New Mexico Strange.